When you stay silent in the face of someone's attacks, when you refuse to give them even a sliver of reaction, you are stripping them of the very thing they feed on, your emotional energy. These people thrive on chaos. They stir the pot not because they seek truth, but because they want to watch you spill your emotions all over the floor so they can scoop them up and use them against you. The moment you engage, you give them exactly what they want. But silence. Silence is the refusal to play their game. It's the moment you pick up the chessboard and walk away mid-match, leaving them stuck with a strategy they can't execute because you're no longer a willing opponent. They expect words, tears, frustration, anything they can latch onto. When you give them nothing, they can't feed, and when they can't feed, their control over you begins to die. What makes silence so powerful is that it doesn't require you to fight on their battlefield. Instead, you remove yourself entirely from the arena they've built. You're not defending yourself, you're not explaining, and you're not proving anything. You're simply refusing to enter the space where they can land their blows. This is why they hate it. Because without your emotional participation, they are left alone with their own behavior. They can no longer spin the situation to make you look like the aggressor or the fool. Your refusal to speak is not weakness, it's a weapon. A weapon they cannot counter because their tactics rely on your cooperation. And here's the part they will never admit: they need your reaction more than they need to be right. If you yell, they win. If you cry, they win. If you argue, they win. But if you look them in the eye or don't even give them that and remain calm, composed and unbothered, they begin to crumble. They'll push harder, try new tactics, maybe even get louder because your silence forces them into desperation. They cannot stand the stillness because stillness means control, and control means you are no longer under their influence. Silence removes their ability to dictate your emotional state. You're no longer operating on their terms. They can throw all the bait they want, but you're not biting. And the moment you stop biting, you start winning. It's not about being passive, it's about being intentional. You're choosing where your energy goes, and it's certainly not going into someone who thrives on draining it. Think of it like oxygen. Conflict needs oxygen to keep burning. Silence is you cutting off the air supply. Eventually, the fire dies out, not because you fought it, but because you starved it. When you learn to embrace silence, you start to understand that not everything deserves your response. People will project their insecurities, their anger, their own failures onto you because they can't carry the weight of them alone. They want you to hold that weight for them. They want you to absorb it so they can feel lighter. But when you stay silent, you're saying, "That's yours, not mine." You're refusing to let their darkness invade your peace. And that, right there, is what drives them mad. They'll say you're cold. They'll say you don't care. They'll say you're avoiding the truth. But that's because your silence forces them to confront a reality they can't handle. Without you defending yourself, they're forced to sit with the discomfort of their own actions. There's nowhere to redirect the blame, nowhere to hide. And when someone has built their entire existence on manipulation and control, your silence is like ripping the curtain off the stage in the middle of their performance. Everyone can see them now, unmasked and exposed. Silence also gives you the most valuable thing they can't take from you: time. Time to think before you respond, time to assess if this person even deserves a response, time to decide what outcome you truly want. In that space, you're not reactive, you're strategic. And strategy always beats impulse. While they're scrambling to provoke you, you're playing the long game, holding your ground, knowing that every second you don't engage is another second you maintain your power. The truth is, silence is not about ignoring the problem. It's about refusing to let the problem dictate your behavior. It's about saying, "I'm in control of me, and nothing you do will pull me out of that control." That's why they hate it. Because it means their influence over you is gone. You're no longer the puppet they can pull strings on. You've cut those strings, and they are left holding useless threads. The energy they once drew from you now stays with you, and they are forced to seek it elsewhere. In the end, silence is not emptiness, it's strength. It's a decision. It's a statement that you don't need to prove yourself to anyone who is committed to misunderstanding you. It's knowing that the loudest move you can make sometimes isn't a word, but the absence of one. That absence will echo louder than any argument ever could, and that's the sound they'll never be able to silence. Evil people despise those who stay silent because silence robs them of the control they crave. Their entire game is built on reaction. Your reaction. They need you to flinch, to defend yourself, to explain, to argue, because every word you give them becomes material they can twist and weaponize. They push and provoke, hoping you'll lose your balance and step into the trap they've laid. But when you remain silent, you're not just ignoring them, you're refusing to step onto the battlefield entirely. You're saying, I won't play by your rules. And that refusal breaks their strategy before it even begins. See, people like this can't survive without an audience. They perform, sometimes subtly, sometimes loudly, but always for a reaction. The moment you give it to them, you become part of their script, and they know exactly what to do next. But when you stay silent, you remove yourself from their production altogether. They're left on stage alone, fumbling with lines they can't deliver without you. That emptiness eats at them because it exposes how much of their power was dependent on your engagement. Silence is not passive, it's the most active form of self-control you can practice in the face of manipulation. It's choosing not to hand over your emotional state to someone who will only exploit it. And here's the truth: they hate silence shifts the power dynamic instantly. Before, they were steering the interaction, pushing you toward emotional exhaustion. Now, you've taken the wheel without saying a single word. That quiet strength unsettles them because it's a strength they cannot penetrate. They want you reactive because reaction means vulnerability. When you speak out of anger or defensiveness, your words are unguarded, and they can use those words as ammunition later. But silence gives them nothing. They can't twist what you didn't say. They can't prove what you didn't admit. They can't trap you in the she said game because you didn't play. And that absence of evidence forces them into desperation, often making them reveal their own malice without realizing it. What most people don't understand is that silence doesn't just protect you from the other person. It exposes them. The longer you remain composed, the more obvious their behavior becomes to anyone watching. Without your reaction to cloud the situation, their cruelty, pettiness, or manipulation stands in full view. That's another reason they hate it. Because silence doesn't just keep you safe, it shines a light on who they truly are. In that stillness, you're also sending a powerful message. You don't have access to me. Access is everything to controlling people. They want access to your mind, your emotions, your time, your peace. Silence builds a wall they can't climb. And when they can't get to you, they start to feel powerless, which for them is unbearable. They might increase their efforts, pushing harder to break you, but every moment you remain unmoved is a reminder that they've lost their grip. This is why silence is so threatening. It forces them to confront their own lack of influence. They're no longer in the position to dictate how you feel or how you respond. And if their identity is built on dominating others, your refusal to engage shakes the very foundation of who they believe they are. It's not just about the interaction. It's about the fact that you're rewriting the script they've been using their whole life. Silence also has a way of unsettling their confidence. When someone provokes you and you don't respond, they start to wonder what you're thinking. They can't read you. They can't predict your next move. And unpredictability is dangerous to a manipulator because their entire tactic depends on anticipating and controlling your behavior. Your silence becomes a mystery they can't solve, and that drives them to frustration, sometimes even self-destruction. It's worth noting that silence doesn't mean you're powerless or that you're avoiding confrontation out of fear. It means you're choosing your battles with intention. It's the awareness that not every attack deserves a counterattack. Some deserve nothing at all, and that nothing is, in itself, a powerful strike. You're not letting them think they've won. You're showing them the game was never worth your energy in the first place. Eventually, evil people learn that silence is impenetrable. They can insult you, accuse you, or try to drag your name through the mud, but if you refuse to react, they're left swinging at air. And that's the most infuriating thing for them. Because you've denied them the satisfaction of victory. You've shown them that their words and actions have no power here. Silence is discipline. It's armor. It's the quiet reminder to yourself that your peace is worth more than proving a point. It's knowing that sometimes the loudest message is delivered without a single sound. And for those who thrive on chaos, that quiet is not peace. It's punishment. A punishment they can't escape, because it comes from you, and you've already decided they will never have that access again. Evil people thrive on attention, and silence denies them the oxygen they need to keep their fire burning. They are addicted to being acknowledged, whether through your praise, your anger, or even your defense against their accusations. Every reaction you give them is a thread they can pull to unravel your composure. When you take that away, it's like cutting off their lifeline. They start to wither in the absence of the validation that comes from dominating someone's emotions. Silence starves them not just of control, but of the satisfaction they crave from seeing you rattled, and that starvation drives them to desperation. These people do not function in environments where they can't provoke a response. They are like actors who step onto a stage expecting applause or boos. Any sound will do as long as it means they have the audience's attention. But when the theater is silent, they realize no one is buying into the performance. That is why silence feels so personal to them. It's not just that you're ignoring their words, it's that you're refusing to acknowledge their existence in the way they demand. And for a person who survives by feeding on the reactions of others, that absence is unbearable. The hunger for attention is more than just ego, it's a tool of power. When you react, you shift the focus away from their actions and onto your emotions. They want to make the conversation about how you're overreacting or misunderstanding, instead of about what they actually did. Silence robs them of that diversion. It keeps the spotlight firmly on their behavior, forcing them to sit with the discomfort of being seen without the distraction of your emotional outburst. This lack of control unsettles them because it forces them to face themselves without a shield. When you stay silent, you are removing yourself from the energy exchange entirely. Manipulators operate on the law of emotional reciprocity. They give you something, whether it's praise, criticism, or provocation, and they expect you to return the energy. They don't care if it's positive or negative, as long as they get something back. But when you respond with nothing, you're breaking that cycle. You're refusing to give them the fuel to continue. And without fuel, their games collapse. This denial of attention is not easy for them to handle. It forces them into a space where they can no longer predict the outcome. Your silence disrupts their rhythm, and people like this rely on rhythm. They poke, you react. They push, you push back. It's a predictable dance, one they've mastered over years of practice. But when you stand still, they lose their step. That stillness feels like rejection to them. And for those who are driven by the need to control others, rejection is the deepest cut. The danger of giving attention to toxic people is that it teaches them how to manipulate you more effectively. Every word you speak is information they can use against you later. Every emotional reaction is proof of where your buttons are and how to push them again. Silence, however, keeps those buttons hidden. It's not just about refusing to engage. It's about protecting your emotional blueprint from being studied and exploited. They can't use what they don't know, and they can't twist what you don't say. This lack of access forces them to work harder for something they used to get easily. And here's the truth, most won't put in the effort. They're opportunists, and if manipulating you becomes too costly, they'll move on to someone else who is easier to provoke. Your silence, therefore, acts as both a shield and a filter. It keeps the worst people out of your life by making it clear that you will not be an easy target. Another layer to this is that silence exposes their dependency on others for a sense of power. Strong people don't need constant reactions to feel secure. Insecure people do. They rely on the emotional chaos of others to distract from the emptiness inside themselves. When you stay silent, you're holding up a mirror to that emptiness. You're forcing them to see that without someone to control, they are left with nothing. And that realization is terrifying to them. Over time, your refusal to feed into their games creates an invisible barrier. It's not a wall of anger or hatred. It's a wall of indifference. And indifference is more painful to them than hate ever could be. Hate still means you care enough to engage. Indifference means you've moved beyond their reach entirely. That's what makes silence such a potent weapon. It says, you don't matter enough to get a reaction from me, without you ever having to utter the words. In the end, silence doesn't just deny them attention. It reclaims your own. It shifts your energy inward, where it belongs, instead of scattering it in response to their chaos. You're not giving them the satisfaction of knowing they've disturbed your peace. You're not validating their existence by allowing them to pull you into conflict. You're showing through your quiet that your time, your mind, and your heart are not open to just anyone. And for someone who survives on taking those things from others, that realization is the deepest cut you can give without ever lifting a hand or raising your voice. Evil people hate silence because it removes their ability to control the direction of the interaction. Their power lies in pulling you into their world, making you respond on their terms, with their timing, and under their rules. The moment you stay silent, you take back the steering wheel, and that infuriates them. They can no longer dictate the pace or frame the narrative because you have cut off the back and forth they depend on. It's like trying to play a game of chess where the other player refuses to move a single piece. Suddenly the strategy they've rehearsed is useless, and the power they thought they had evaporates. When you speak too soon or react too quickly, you're playing into their script. They have already imagined the scenarios, the counterarguments, the traps to corner you emotionally. But silence erases their playbook. It's a move they cannot predict because there's nothing to analyze, no tone of voice to twist, no words to manipulate. The absence of a reaction becomes the most unpredictable reaction of all, and people who thrive on control cannot stand unpredictability. It threatens the very structure of how they operate. The absence of sound is more than just quiet, it is dominance without aggression. In your silence, you are not cowering, you are not retreating, you are asserting that their words do not require your response. You are showing that they are not important enough to pull you off center. That unspoken statement carries a power far greater than anything you could say. They can try to escalate, provoke, and even demean you to pull you into their storm, but when you remain unshaken, it exposes their weakness for everyone to see. The truth is, silence shifts the balance of power from reactive to proactive. When you speak, you give away pieces of your position, your thinking, your emotions. When you stay quiet, you force them to make the next move without knowing what you're planning. That uncertainty rattles them because control is their safety net. They operate best when they can predict your behavior and manipulate it, but silence removes their foresight. It turns the dynamic upside down. They are now the ones unsure, unsettled, and scrambling for answers. This control over the pace of the exchange is something most people underestimate. If you control the tempo, you control the outcome. Toxic individuals know how to keep things heated, so you act impulsively. They thrive on speed because speed kills thought. But silence slows everything down to a pace they hate. A pace where you can think, where you can observe, and where they lose momentum. You're not in their game anymore, you've brought them into yours. And they don't know how to win on your field. Silence also robs them the emotional cues they rely on. Many manipulators and toxic personalities are skilled at reading micro-reactions, your facial expressions, your voice, your choice of words to adapt their strategy. When you stay silent, you cut off that feedback loop entirely. There's nothing for them to measure, nothing for them to adjust to. They are left guessing, and in that guessing, they lose their confidence. They begin to doubt their own effectiveness, which is a form of psychological disruption they're not prepared for. You also have to understand that silence is not the same as doing nothing. It's doing something very intentional. It's refusing to dance to their rhythm. It's consciously choosing to pause, to hold your energy, to let them stew in the space you've created. That space becomes suffocating for them because it's a void they can't fill with their usual tactics. And when they can't fill it, they start to fill it with their own insecurities, their own doubts, their own fear of losing control. Over time, consistently maintaining silence in the face of provocation changes the entire dynamic between you and them. They begin to realize that the old levers they pulled to get a reaction from you no longer work. That recognition is deeply unsettling because it means their control over you is slipping. And for someone who feeds on power, losing control over even one person feels like losing control over their entire influence. The most powerful thing about silence in these situations is that it doesn't just take away their control. It gives all of it back to you. You decide when, if ever, the conversation moves forward. You decide which topics are worth engaging in. You decide how much of your mental and emotional energy is spent. You are no longer letting them dictate the terms, and that reversal of control is something they cannot tolerate. It forces them to see that their power only ever existed because you allowed it. That's why silence isn't weakness. It's strategy. It's restraint in its most disciplined form. It's refusing to let your emotions be played like a piano by someone who's been studying your keys for years. And while it may not satisfy the part of you that wants to defend yourself in the moment, it serves a higher purpose. It protects your peace, reclaims your control, and leaves those who thrive on manipulation with nothing but their own frustration. And for people like that, frustration without a target is unbearable. Evil people hate silence because silence demands that they sit with themselves, and for many of them, that is the most terrifying thing they can face. The moment you stop responding, stop explaining, and stop feeding their need for chaos, they are left alone with the truth of who they are, and they cannot stand it. These are people who survive by projecting, by throwing their flaws, their insecurities, and their guilt onto others so they never have to look inward. But when you remain silent, that mirror they've been trying to avoid suddenly turns back toward them, and the reflection is not something they want to see. Your silence becomes a confrontation they can't escape. Without the noise of your reaction to drown out their own thoughts, the voice in their head gets louder. It starts to question their actions, or worse, remind them of the emptiness inside. They might never admit this to anyone, not even to themselves, but deep down, they know that what they are doing is wrong. Silence is like pulling away the curtain they've been hiding behind, and now the only thing left is their own shadow staring back at them. For someone who thrives on avoiding accountability, that's unbearable. When you speak, especially when you defend yourself, you give them something to focus on that isn't themselves. They can latch onto your tone, your words, your emotions, and twist them into something they can attack. This allows them to shift the spotlight away from their actions and back onto you. But when you give them nothing, no argument, no defense, no justification, they have nowhere to redirect the focus. That's when the walls they've built start to crack. They can feel the pressure, because now it's not you holding the weight of the conversation. It's them. Silence is powerful, because it's not just about denying them attention. It's about forcing them into the one place they don't want to be, their own mind. People like this often live in distraction, surrounding themselves with noise, conflict, and drama to avoid dealing with their inner reality. Your silence disrupts that cycle. It removes the distraction. It strips away the noise. And in that sudden stillness, the ugliness they've been hiding from themselves becomes harder to ignore. That's why they react with such aggression or desperation when someone refuses to engage. They're trying to drown out what's creeping up on them in the quiet. It's also important to understand that silence doesn't just create discomfort. It creates exposure. Without your words to spin or your reactions to manipulate, they're forced to sit in the open with their behavior. Others around them can see the dynamic more clearly because there's no shouting match, no back and forth to cloud the reality. The more they lash out into your quiet, the more obvious it becomes to everyone who the problem really is. In a way, silence becomes a spotlight, not on you, but on them. And that's the kind of attention they hate the most, because it's the kind they can't control. In the absence of your response, they start to unravel. They might talk faster, get louder, or become more dramatic in their attempts to provoke you. That's because they're not just trying to get a reaction. They're trying to escape the stillness that forces them to think about themselves. It's like watching someone tread water in a pool that's completely calm. They don't know how to handle the lack of waves, so they try to create their own. And if you still don't respond, they realize they're swimming against nothing but their own reflection. The irony is that silence can be more revealing than any argument you could make. It says, "I see you for exactly who you are, and I won't waste my energy playing along." It strips away the performance they've been putting on, because performances require an audience. Once you stop clapping, the show ends. And when the show ends, they have no choice but to face what's backstage. For many of them, that's where the truth lies, and it's the last place they want to go. Silence forces them to confront a reality they've spent years running from, that their control over others is fragile, that their influence depends on people reacting, and that without someone to engage, their power crumbles. And deep down, they know that if they can't control you, they might not be able to control others either. That's why they hate silence so much. It's not just about you refusing to give them what they want. It's about you showing them that their entire way of operating can be dismantled without a single word. In the end, staying silent is not about winning the argument. It's about removing yourself from the argument entirely. It's about letting them wrestle with their own reflection while you conserve your energy and protect your peace. The quiet may feel uncomfortable at first, but that discomfort is your power growing. And for those who have built their identity on manipulating others, nothing is more threatening than a person who no longer feels the need to respond. Silence isn't just the absence of sound, it's the presence of strength, and that's exactly why it drives them mad. Evil people hate silence because silence is a form of control they can't break. When you stay quiet, you're telling them without words that you're not willing to be pulled into their game. They thrive on emotional reactions, anger, frustration, fear, because those reactions give them something to grab onto, something they can use against you. But silence gives them nothing. It's like trying to fight with smoke. You can swing at it, you can shout at it, but you can't pin it down. That's what makes them so uneasy. Your stillness removes their leverage, and without leverage, their usual tactics become useless. When you respond with words, especially in the heat of the moment, you give them the opportunity to twist those words, to bend them, to take them out of context. You might be defending yourself, but they hear an opening, a chance to manipulate the narrative. Silence takes that away. It shuts the door they were hoping you'd leave open. This isn't weakness, it's the opposite. It's the discipline to resist the urge to explain yourself to someone who has no interest in understanding you. And that discipline unsettles them, because it means you're not playing by their rules anymore. Silence also shifts the balance of power. In conflict, the person who is reacting is often the one on the defensive. They're dancing to the other person's tune, moving when the other person says move. But when you remain silent, you stop dancing altogether. You remove yourself from the rhythm they're trying to set. And suddenly, they're the one left scrambling to figure out what comes next. This loss of control doesn't just frustrate them, it threatens their identity. People like this see dominance as survival, so when you take away their control, you're not just disrupting a conversation, you're shaking the foundation they stand on. The discomfort silence creates isn't just about the absence of sound, it's about the presence of uncertainty. They don't know what you're thinking, and for manipulative people, that's terrifying. They can't predict your next move, they can't plan their next attack, and they can't measure whether their tactics are working. That uncertainty eats at them because their entire strategy relies on knowing how to push your buttons. When those buttons stop working, they're left standing in the dark, unsure of how to proceed. This unpredictability is a kind of power they can't replicate, and it's one they deeply resent. There's also a psychological aspect to silence that works against them. It forces them into a mental space they avoid at all costs. When you stay quiet, you're not giving them external stimulation to latch onto, so their mind has nowhere to go but inward. This can stir up feelings they've been suppressing: guilt, shame, insecurity, and they'll often do anything to avoid that kind of self-reflection. That's why they push harder, raise their voice, or throw out more provocative comments when you don't respond. They're trying to fill the silence so they don't have to sit in it. But the more they try, the more obvious it becomes that they're grasping at control that's slipping away. Silence, when used with intention, also communicates boundaries. It says, I won't allow you to cross this line, without you having to spell it out. Boundaries make toxic people uncomfortable because they limit their access to your energy. The moment you stop reacting, you're telling them they no longer have the ability to dictate your emotional state. That's one of the deepest forms of power you can have in the face of manipulation: emotional independence. And once they realize they can't shake that, they understand they've lost something they may never get back. In many ways, silence is like holding up a mirror. It reflects their behavior back at them, without you having to narrate what they're doing wrong. And mirrors can be brutal for people who spend their lives hiding from who they are. Without a verbal back and forth to cloud the moment, their actions stand out in sharp relief, not just to you but to anyone watching. This is where silence becomes more than just self-protection, it becomes a form of exposure. Their true character is revealed, not through your accusations, but through their own desperate attempts to fill the quiet. What's most threatening to them is that silence can't be controlled. They can argue against your words, they can interrupt you, they can dismiss your points, but they can't manipulate what isn't being said. They can't trap you in circular arguments if you refuse to take the first step. And in that refusal, you create a kind of stillness that speaks louder than anything you could verbalize. It tells them, without saying a single word, that they have no hold over you anymore. And for someone whose power comes from control, that's the most dangerous message you could ever send. Silence works like a weapon not because it's loud, but because it forces the other person to face themselves. For people who thrive on control, manipulation, and dominance, that's the one confrontation they can't win. They spend their lives projecting outward, shaping how others think, feel, and react, because it keeps them from having to look inward. But when you refuse to respond, when you withhold the reactions they expect, you leave them alone with their own thoughts. In that stillness, there's nothing to distract them from the reality of who they are. This is not a place they want to be. It's uncomfortable. It's threatening. And it's a space they will do almost anything to avoid. You can see this play out in real time. The moment you fall silent, they will often escalate. They may raise their voice, throw out cutting remarks, or try to bait you into a reaction. This isn't because they've suddenly become more powerful. It's because your silence is exposing the cracks in their armor. They need your engagement to keep the illusion alive. Without it, the mask starts to slip, and they feel the panic of losing their grip. And here's the part they'll never admit deep down. They're afraid of what they might see if the mask comes all the way off. They don't want to sit in that space where their actions and motives are bare for even themselves to witness. Silence acts as a mirror in these moments. It reflects their behavior back to them, without the buffer of your words to soften the blow. It's like standing in front of a mirror with harsh lighting. Suddenly, every flaw, every shadow, every detail is visible. In conversation, your words can give them something to latch onto, something to deflect from the truth. But silence offers no such escape. It forces their behavior into focus. It leaves them no one else to blame, no way to twist the narrative, no place to hide. That's why they hate it so much. It strips away their ability to control the story. This is where silence becomes more than just a defense. It becomes an offense. It's not passive, it's strategic. By not giving them what they want, you're not just protecting yourself, you're actively dismantling their ability to operate. Every manipulator, every toxic person relies on a certain cycle: provoke, react, manipulate the reaction, and regain control. Your silence breaks that cycle completely. Without your participation, the game stops. They can't win because you've refused to play. And the best part is, you're doing it without raising your voice, without engaging in a tug of war, without even breaking your own calm. What makes this so powerful is that silence doesn't just protect you in the moment. It reshapes the dynamic over time. The more consistently you refuse to feed into their games, the more they start to realize that their usual methods don't work on you anymore. And for people like this, there's nothing more frustrating than realizing they've lost influence. Influence is their lifeblood. Take that away, and you've taken away the thing that makes them feel powerful. This is why silence has such a long-lasting impact. It's not just a reaction. It's a statement about who you are and what you will and will not allow in your life. It also signals to others around you that you're not easily swayed or controlled. Toxic people often rely on an audience to validate their behavior. They want others to see you as the unstable one, the emotional one, the one who overreacts. But when you remain calm and quiet, you rob them of that performance. They're left flailing, looking unreasonable while you remain unshaken. The power shifts not because you shouted the loudest, but because you refused to be dragged into the chaos. This not only protects your reputation, it builds it. People start to see you as composed, disciplined, and in control of yourself. And that kind of image can't be easily dismantled by lies or manipulation. The irony is that silence can make you the loudest voice in the room. In a heated exchange, the quiet person stands out. People notice. They wonder what you're thinking. They pay more attention to your presence because you're not cluttering the space with noise. And for someone trying to dominate you through words, that's infuriating. They want the spotlight, but your silence shifts it without you lifting a finger. Suddenly, they're the one working to fill the space you've created, and the harder they try, the more unbalanced they become. Silence is misunderstood because people assume it means you're doing nothing. But in reality, you're doing everything that matters. You're controlling your emotions. You're choosing your battles. You're preserving your energy. You're sending a message without giving away a single piece of yourself. And that's the core reason evil people hate it. It's a kind of power they can't steal from you. They can manipulate words, twist arguments, and provoke emotions, but they can't touch the strength it takes to stay silent. That strength belongs to you alone, and it's the one thing they'll never be able to control. Evil people hate silence because it forces them to lose the one thing they rely on most: control over the narrative. Every manipulator, every person who thrives on causing harm, operates like a director of a play. They want to set the stage, assign the roles, and dictate the script. And your role in their mind is to be reactive. They count on your words, your tone, your defensiveness, or even your anger to help shape the story they want others to believe. The moment you stay silent, you take that power away. Suddenly, they can no longer control how the scene unfolds because you've stopped playing your part. This isn't just a refusal. It's a direct disruption of their strategy, and it leaves them scrambling for a way to regain control. When you speak, they can twist your words. When you explain yourself, they can poke holes in your reasoning. When you defend yourself, they can frame you as aggressive or irrational. But silence is untouchable. It leaves them with nothing to grab, nothing to bend, nothing to weaponize against you. And that's terrifying for them because it means they're left with only their own words and actions, standing naked in the light for everyone to see. Without your verbal participation, they can't redirect attention or create the smoke screen they need to hide behind. This is why so many toxic people push for a reaction. They'll repeat the same lies, circle back to old arguments, or throw insults meant to cut deep. Anything to get you talking again. They know that once you start explaining, they've got an opening to spin the situation in their favor. But if you remain calm and quiet, they have to confront the reality that the conversation is no longer theirs to control. It's a slow, sinking realization for them because they depend on chaos to keep you off balance. Silence replaces chaos with clarity, and clarity is their enemy. Control for them isn't just about winning an argument. It's about keeping you in a constant state of emotional reaction. They want you flustered, defensive, and unsure of yourself, because in that state you're easier to manipulate. Silence breaks that pattern entirely. It gives you the space to think, to observe, and to make decisions on your own terms. And it also shows them something they hate to see, that you are not emotionally dependent on their approval, attention, or validation. The moment they realize they can't pull you like a puppet, their sense of dominance starts to crumble. The loss of control is even more damaging to them when it happens in front of others. Many of these people thrive on public manipulation. They perform for an audience, making themselves look composed, witty, or righteous while painting you as unreasonable. But silence flips that dynamic. Without you feeding the drama, the spotlight stays on their behavior. Their attempts to provoke you start looking desperate, petty, even unstable. The audience they were counting on to side with them starts to notice the cracks in their act. That's the kind of shift that can completely dismantle their influence. Here's the other reason silence destroys their control. It forces time into the equation. Evil people like to push for immediate reactions because quick responses are rarely well thought out. They want you to speak without thinking, so you'll say something they can use against you. But silence buys you time. It lets emotions settle, lets the truth become clearer, and puts you back in charge of when and how you respond, if you choose to respond at all. That delay alone can make their tactics useless because manipulation thrives in speed and confusion, not in patience and clarity. Some people mistake silence for weakness, but in this context, it's the opposite. It's a declaration that you will not be controlled, that you won't participate in their game, and that you're willing to let the truth speak louder than any argument could. And for people who are obsessed with control, that's infuriating. They can't stand that you're choosing a strategy they can't undermine. They'll throw everything at you: accusations, guilt trips, even feigned vulnerability, to get you talking again. But the longer you maintain your composure, the more powerless they become. The real danger for them is that once you've learned how effective silence is, you can use it again and again. They know that if they lose control over you once, they could lose it permanently. And that's why your quiet is such a threat. It represents a freedom they can't take from you. It shows them that the grip they once had is gone. And no matter what they do, they can't force you back into the role they've written for you. It's not just about the moment, it's about the long-term shift in power. In the end, silence is their greatest fear because it hands control back to you without a fight. It's not loud, it's not aggressive, and it doesn't need to be. It simply cuts the strings they've been pulling, leaving them to face the one thing they've been trying to avoid all along: the truth about themselves. And that truth, when they can no longer control the narrative, is what they fear most.